In Chapter 9, we'll look at freeform modeling with the ribbon. This is an intuitive method for sculpting a surface using a brush interface. Before you begin to use the freeform modeling tools, be aware that the scale of your object is very important. I want to model a terrain or a landscape, and I want it to be 1 kilometer on a side. However, if I built it at that scale, then the brush tools would not be able to handle the object. We wouldn't be able to make the brush large enough in order to sculpt the surface. You need to start from a miniature if you're going to model something very, very large. And that's what I've done here. This is a plane primitive that's 1,000 centimeters on a side, or 10 meters on a side. And that's a 1/100th scale model. That's what I have to do in order to use the brush tools. Model something pretty small. And then when I'm done, if I want to, I can scale it up by a factor of 100, so it'll be 1 kilometer on a side. All right, cool. Now it needs to be an editable poly object. Right now it's a plane primitive. I'll right-click and choose Convert to Editable Poly. Then open up the ribbon if it's not already visible. And we've got a bunch of tabs here. The one we want is the Freeform tab. As I mentioned in a previous movie, to use the ribbon, the Modify panel has to be active. If I go over to the Create panel or any other panel, then a lot of the tools here are grayed out and inaccessible. The Modify panel must be active. Even if the Modify panel is hidden, it still needs to be active because we can hide that command panel completely. And in fact, let's do that. Let's hide a bunch of these interface elements that we're not going to need in this chapter. We can go into a mode called Expert Mode, and we'll still be able to see the ribbon, but everything else will be hidden. The keyboard shortcut for Expert Mode is Control-X. Now I've got a lot more real estate on my screen to work with. I can exit out of Expert Mode by clicking on the big button down here, Cancel, or just hit Control-X again, and my interface is restored. So Control-X to go into Expert Mode, and the Modify panel is currently active even though it's hidden. We don't need to see these edged faces here. I'll hit F4 to hide those. The first tool you want to get familiar with is the Push-Pull brush. When you click on that, you get a pop-up window here with the paint options. I recommend that you actually dock that back onto the ribbon, and the reason is that there are some interesting and important tools here. When I click on paint options, that little bar, I get another little pop-up there, but when I move my mouse away, that disappears. And that's really hard to work with because I need to get at those. And I want to actually make that stick onto the screen. In order to do that, I need to actually dock it back onto the ribbon. Go up here to that Paint Options bar, hover your mouse, and then you get these other bars that appear. And this little tiny button on the upper right-hand corner is Return Panels to Ribbon. Click on that, and now it's back on the ribbon. And if I click on Paint Options here, if I need to keep that on the screen, then I can click on this little push pin icon, and that'll cause it to stick. And now I won't have it disappearing on its own. Okay, so with that done now, let's take a look at the parameters for the push-pull brush. We got size, strength, and offset. If I just use the default values here and drag across my landscape, I don't see very much effect. Got a tiny little bit of deformation there. All right, so I can cancel that operation. I can either use Control-Z to undo or click on this X button here, and that will cancel all of the brush-based operations I've recently performed. Click on that X and it'll erase that stroke. We've got the size, which is the radius of the brush. We can increase that here, but it's much faster and easier to use the keyboard shortcut. To change the radius of the brush, hold down Control and Shift and drag the mouse button up or down. And now I've got a much larger radius. Drag that across and we can see we've got a larger shape there, but it's still not high enough. I'll cancel that. We've got the strength and the offset here. It's not really strength actually, it's speed. And with a higher strength, then you'll get a greater amount of deformation if the speed of your stroke is constant. I'm actually going to leave the strength at its default of 1, but I'm going to increase the offset, which is the actual amount of deformation. It's a little bit weird. Strength is speed of your stroke, And offset is the actual strength. Okay, so I'm going to set the offset to, let's say, 20 and drag across. And now we've got good enough deformation there. All right, I can cancel that if I want. Pretty cool. And we can play around with this a bit. If I just click a little bit here, then nothing's much going to happen because I have a pretty low strength or speed. Just clicking once or twice, I don't really get a lot. If I hold the mouse down and then drag in that location, then it's going to increase the elevation there. Okay, I can X that out as well. Using the brush size, I can quickly sculpt up a landscape because I can do kind of a first pass at making something really big. And then I can change the brush size with Control and Shift and maybe bring that down and then go back in a second pass and kind of sculpt that a little bit more. Alrighty, now if this is what I want, if I'm happy with that, then I can commit to it. And that's what this green checkbox is here, commit. It's essentially baking the strokes that you've created. When I click on that green checkbox, now I'm saying that this is the shape that I want. Once you click commit, then the red cancel button disappears. And that's an indicator that the cancel button will take you to the state of the object at the last time you committed. Okay, so to illustrate, I'm going to hit Control Z, and now I'm back to the state before I committed. And now I can actually cancel all of those edits. I'll do another little bit of push-pull, make the brush larger with Control and Shift, drag that across, do a little bit of sculpting action there. And then if I want to selectively cancel what I've done, then I can use the Revert button here. And that's basically an eraser tool. Click on that one, and then I drag my mouse across here, and I'm erasing the strokes that I've done. But of course, if I commit, I can't erase. The Revert button will allow us to selectively restore the object back to the last time we committed. If I commit now and then do some more edits with the push-pull brush, and then use the Revert, I'm going back to the state when I committed last. So that's how push-pull works. We can also invert the direction of push-pull, and there's a keyboard shortcut for that to invert. And it's a very simple one. You just hold down the Alt key on your keyboard. Hold down Alt, and instead of pulling upward, we can push downward. All right, maybe I'll revert those changes. All right, cool. That's a simple introduction to push-pull and how the commit, cancel, and revert buttons work.